Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day we explore how technology is transforming our lives, business, and even world. And it's the world that I want to focus on today. Think bigger. Now, I recently discovered a company called Esri that is combining geography and technology so that Esri users can apply the science of where to help their organisations solve some of the world's most difficult problems. And location intelligence can help local authorities and housing associations improve the provision of housing, mapping local infrastructure, identifying the right schemes, projects, etc., all for local needs and assessing housing capacity. But enough from me. Buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Edinburgh so we can speak with Charles Kennelly, CTO at Esri UK. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am Charles Kennelly, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Esri UK. So Esri is a business been around since the late 60s. Based out of North America originally. Esri UK is a UK-based company with a relationship with that one. But what we do is we help people explore and understand the world using geography, essentially. We supply tools that let them capture data, which is geographic in nature, and analyze it and present it. And to make that more concrete, we get used by people like water utilities to map where their pipes are and how to make sure leakage is kept to a minimum. We help electricity companies understand where to put their pylons. We help police forces understand crime. We understand the Environment Agency, manage pollution incidents. Anything that has a physical location, we help people understand it better.
It's incredibly cool what you're doing here. It's one of those unsung, almost like those unsung heroes and the technology that we all take for granted that keeps things moving. And like you said, Esri is the global market leader in geographic information systems and has also been helping customers improve their results since, I think, 1969. But
69 it started, yes.
Wow. And for people tuning in and hearing about you guys for the first time or unsure exactly what it is that you do, could you possibly set the scene and get everyone on the same page with maybe sharing a few of the kind of problems that you're solving with this technology?
So one thing that people might understand quite well is insurance, for example. Yeah. Where if you're asking an insurance company to provide, you want to insure your house, they will use the location of the house to work out the precise flooding risk of that. They will work out the subsidence risk because of trees nearby. They will look at crime figures and so on and come up with a picture of this is the risk of insuring this property. And they will do that sub-second by essentially taking the location of your house and looking at multiple layers of information that give them more context about that property. And then finally, they will say, are we overinsured in this area? Have we insured too many houses? So our risk has gone up, even if this specific property is okay. And they will adjust the price accordingly. And that's an example of sort of asking a question of geography very quickly. On a more personal note, I moved to Edinburgh 20 years ago with a young family, and I use the systems that we have to find out where to live. So I first of all made a map of house prices, and that told me you're not living in Edinburgh. And then I made a map of where can I drive from my new office in 30 minutes, and that told me you can be east, west, and south of Edinburgh. I then made a map of crime figures, and that told me where to avoid. And I made a map of rainfall, and that told me where to avoid. And I ended up with 3 villages to look at, and I live in one of those villages now, 20 years later, and I'm very happy. And it's just a good example of using location as a way of deriving information that you would struggle to find otherwise. Does that help?
Yeah, it's incredibly cool. It really is. I'm glad it had a happy ending as well, and it proved it by you living where you are now and absolutely loving life, right? Yeah,
but one interesting thing is when I did that 20 years ago, the systems I used to do it cost probably, if you added the hardware and the software together, about £200,000 worth of hardware and software, and some of the data sets I had to make myself from raw information. Now you can do the same process essentially for free on the internet using open data. And that's the real change that we've seen in this. It's much more accessible as a technology than it was 20 years ago.
And if we take a problem such as the London's housing crisis,
Yes.
which is obviously a big topic over here, what kind of role do you play in solving a problem like that?
So the major problem with assessing housing crisis is trying to identify what you can do and what the impact of what you can do is. It's very easy to say, we want 50 new properties on this site. But what is quite hard to say is, what's the impact of those properties and what services do we actually need to provide? Can the local schools cope with the extra children? Is there a road access that we can make use of? Will the water supply have enough pressure to cope with this? It's the consequential effects that are complicated and can take a long time to work out or get missed and then cause problems downstream. What we can do is we can take the location and use that to pull together lots of relevant information just simply by the fact it's in the same location. And then we can run models against that and give an answer to the question you're asking in quite a simple way. So, for example, we know through COVID-19 that access to green space is just absolutely crucial for people's mental health and their physical health. And we can easily assess every property in London, for example, and give it a score based on its access to green space. And then we can say things like, well, if you converted this area into new green space, you would improve the lives of these people in this area, and you would maybe increase the property value as well. And you can show the value of the park itself, which is very hard to do with other techniques. So essentially, we can help people make decisions quicker because we can pull together more information and assess the consequential impact of decisions almost instantly.
And I'm curious, if we dig even deeper into that, what are the key areas where location intelligence can help local authorities and housing associations improve the provision of housing too?
A lot of it is to do with access to information. If you think about the processes we have right now, somebody is looking at a property or potential development, they have to ask the question, what are the constraints in this area? What are the opportunities? What services are here? And asking that question can take a long time, and getting access to all the data can be complex. And that process in itself, that time it takes, slows everything down and makes it harder to make decisions. We can bring that asking of the question of what do I need to know to develop this area, we can make it almost instant. And therefore, you can start asking questions more about the quality of what you're doing rather than the ability to do it. So rather than just get a yes, you can do this, or no, you can start looking at the quality of it. And crucially, the developers, the housing associations, and the local authorities can all see the same view of information because it's very easy to pull together these multiple sets in one place. So you don't have a disparity between the information that the local authority has and what the developer would have, for example, which I think will lead to a sort of fairer decision-making process. But a good example in London in particular is there's obviously a lot of people living in a relatively small space with lots of constraints, but there are opportunities to develop in better ways there. But it's identifying those that's quite hard. So the sort of things that we see happening at the moment is people looking at the space above buildings, where you might have a 2-story building, but the area they're in would allow 4-story buildings. And there's undeveloped opportunity above our existing properties that could be made use of. And that in itself is a huge amount of potential development space, which is currently unused, that wouldn't impact things like access to green space and other amenities.
And one of the things we talk about a lot on this podcast is how government services often struggle to keep up with the pace of technological change. But before you came on today, one of the things that stood out for me was that the government over here has also recognised the potential of location intelligence technology for the UK economy and designed a strategy around that. But can you expand on that for me?
Yes. So, I mean, the sector is generally called geospatial, which is a catch-all term for the sort of things that we do. And as you said, it's like sort of almost open secret that there's this capability available, but it has not been exploited to its full potential. And so we've been delighted that the government has recognised that a better approach to making use of geospatial information and the techniques around it, they think can add multiple billions to the UK economy. And they put some effort into exploring this and come up with one of the world's first sort of national strategies for geospatial, for exploitation of geospatial. And they break it down into a number of categories. So there's things like making it easier for people to access geospatial data. So information about local plans and the environment and flood risk and all these sort of data sets that are out there, just making those more available. It also talks about protecting the privacy of people and their location information because it's obviously highly sensitive information. It talks about helping people understand how better to make use of the techniques of geospatial data and how they can apply that to their everyday lives, and then creating innovation around it. So a good example of an area which has developed massively from geospatial is SatNav, for example. If you think about satellite navigation, it's ubiquitous across the UK. Everybody uses it on their phones, in their cars. That's sophisticated geospatial technology that had a very clear use case and was developed to the point where it's almost invisible now. We just take it for granted. And you can see the value of being able to navigate across the UK and optimize delivery routes for vehicles and so on. That's an example of the benefits that geospatial can unlock. And we want to apply that same approach to every other area of UK life. So the planning process around housing, protecting the environment, maintaining our food security, understanding complex things like climate change or the impact of Brexit, for example.
And there's an excellent quote in that government strategy which states that innovation in property-related technology is transforming how developers find land and evaluate building potential, how local authorities and residents approach planning, and how homes are bought, sold, and rented. I'm curious, is that something that you're seeing too?
Yes, absolutely. So we work very closely with a partner called LandPlan. And what they do is they take a property, a single, let's start with a single property, and they calculate things like how many dentists are nearby, access to transport systems, access to green space, property prices paid in the same area over the last 5 years, and so on. And they build up a picture of that property that a developer traditionally could spend a year's work longer on making an assessment of a site to come up with its development potential. How much will it cost us to develop it? What are the benefits, and so on? We can, with LandPlan and working with geospatial data, we can provide that answer sub-second, literally sub-second. And it's within, we've done tests on it, it's within 5% of the value that the traditional approach, which could take a year, would do. So if you take that for one property, you can then do the same process for an entire city. And then that enables local authorities to do things like, if we provided a new transport link here, what would it mean for property development? And they can ask that question really quickly and they can see what the likely answer is. And the property developers themselves can understand, if there was a new transport link here, what new sites would be available to us? Where would there be additional value? It simply comes down to, if you can ask these complex questions and get answers instantly, then you can start looking at the quality of what you do, not just the process of what you do. And that will, we think, improve transparency on the planning process. So it allows the public to see what decisions are being made and how they're being made. And we think it will enable fundamentally, it will allow more properties to be developed and made available to people in a safer, better way.
And before we started recording this podcast today, you were telling me that obviously this is, I think today's the first time in a long time that you're back in your office. So I've got to ask, what have been your biggest challenges this year at Esri, and then indeed as CTO, and how do you overcome them and turn them into opportunities?
So we've been very fortunate as a business because we can work virtually. We're not a hotel or something that relies on people coming to us. So we've moved to virtual working very, very easily. And what we have seen through the pandemic is a real requirement and desire to work with spatial data. If you want to understand how a virus spreads, if you want to communicate where where people can go safely and how they can socially distance safely, then you need geospatial data. So we've been dealing with just a real increase in the need for and the desire to work with geospatial data. So it's been a really busy period for us in this last year. And part of it is just trying to help people who've never worked in this area before make sense of what they need to do. We released a data set earlier in the year of pavement widths. So we simply just, for us, it was a relatively simple calculation. It took a day or two. We took Ordnance Survey's data and we calculated the width of every pavement in the UK, and we published it as a map. And what we saw was a huge level of interest. It was published across many media, newspapers and so on online. But also lots of local authorities asking us for access to the data so they could do better planning of where people could safely exercise without breaching social distancing rules. So really for us, it's been coping with this increased demand and the complexities around that.
And a few weeks ago, I believe it was the International Celebration of Geographic Information System Technology, which actually encouraged people to learn about geography and real-world apps that are making a difference in our world right now. But can you tell me more about that and how listeners can register their virtual events on that app?
So it's GIS Day, as we call it, was yesterday.
Yeah.
And it's been running for about 20 years, GIS Day, and it's a celebration. So GIS stands for Geographic Information Systems. It's a formal name for what we do. And for about 20 years, there's been this thing called GIS Day where we celebrate the use of geography to help society. And we encourage people around the world to sort of, share what they've been doing and rejoice in the for want of a better word, the fun they can have with this stuff and the problems that they can tackle. And it acts as a showcase for what's possible and inspires communities and individuals to do better. There's a really interesting GIS Day page that Harrow Council actually did yesterday. I'd encourage people to, if you just do a search for Harrow Council and GIS Day, you'll see what they put together for it. And it's quite inspiring, and it's them describing what they've been able to do making use of geospatial techniques. And if people do want to know more about it, literally a search for GIS Day 2020 will give you access to all the information you need. And if you look for Esri around that, you will see a site where you can actually see what other people have been doing, but also register what you are doing. If you are working in this area, you can say, look, here's something I've been doing, and share it. And there's a link there on that page to share all that.
Incredibly cool what you're doing here. And of course, we're getting towards the end of 2020, which has been a year to forget for so many reasons. But what excites you about the road ahead for Esri and also the role that GIS tech will play in that future too?
So I get asked that question quite a bit at the moment. And I think most people expect the answer to be something to do with artificial intelligence and the application of that to geospatial. And it is genuinely an exciting, interesting area. The thing that excites me most about what we're doing and the potential is there's never been a better time for getting access to the technology and the data that you need to use geospatial techniques. And it's that accessibility that interests me. It's the innovation we'll see when people have never come across this before, get access to it and can do incredible things. So a good example is there's a website that Johns Hopkins University in North America put out, which was a COVID dashboard. And it's become one of the prime sources of information around the world for COVID-related issues. It's just, if you do a search once again for Johns Hopkins University and COVID, you'll see the dashboard. That's been accessed over 1 trillion times around the world. And at its peak, it was being accessed by 8,000 times a second. It was put together by a student at Johns Hopkins University, and it costs a few £100 a year to run. And it's that accessibility that I find is the most innovative and interesting and biggest driver of change that we will see over the next few years. It's what people will do now they have access to these capabilities at a reasonable price and a level of complexity which is manageable. That's what excites me most, is exploiting that opportunity.
And I suspect we will have people listening all over the world. And just listening to our conversation today, you've done a great job in opening that curiosity about accessing and leveraging that freely available data. And it's what happens from that curiosity being open and what happens next. So for those people listening, can you remind the listeners of where they can find you online, contact your team, etc., just in case they've got any questions? Because like you say, it is an incredibly exciting future.
I think easiest is probably LinkedIn for myself. Yeah. And if they just go to the Esri UK website, you'll see quite a lot of opportunity for engaging with us and exploring what other people have been doing as well. And that's where the inspiration comes from. It's seeing what other people have done with this technology.
Well, I always say at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. But what I love about what you're doing here is using technology and geography to help society as a whole. And it's fantastic what you're doing. And I hope people do check this out. And I'm interested in where it leads. So I'd love to have a catch-up conversation with you next year. But more than anything, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
I love how GIS is this scientific framework for gathering, analysing and visualising geographic data to help us make better decisions. But I also love how accessible it is, even though possibly before this podcast, myself included, I didn't realise how accessible it was, or I've heard or seen too much about it. So hopefully we've changed that with today's interview. And as this podcast will go live a few weeks after GIS Day, I do urge you check out the website and help others learn about geography and real-world applications of GIS that are making a difference in our society. It's incredibly cool, and again, like so many topics that we cover on this podcast, it's that tech is solving real problems that we often never get to see or hear about. So check them out, let me know your thoughts, and you can do that by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, and my website is techblogwriter.co.uk, where you'll find 1,400 other interviews on this podcast, also links to my Netgear podcast, Switched On Thinking, and my podcast with Citrix, which is Tech Fusion. And also how you can work with me too, but I think that's more than enough for one day. So a big thank you for listening, and hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. So until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.